of Evolution, Part 5, 6, 7. The part of Muhammad. About 620 AD, Muhammad, the founder of the religion of Islam, hated the polytheism that was around him at the time. One of his goals and desires was to develop a monotheistic religion. He developed an unusual mixture between Christianity and Judaism. He eventually became very anti-Christian. He wanted a limited God of nature, a pantheistic type of God. The God of Mohammedanism is not the God of the Bible by any stretch of the imagination. It is a little pantheistic God of nature. Because of this, the Islam religion accepts evolution very readily as a scientific fact because it fits so well with their teaching. In the country of Turkey, which is almost totally dedicated to Muhammad, evolution is taught as a fact. In 1225 AD, a man was born named Thomas Aquinas. He was called the Angelic Doctor. He continued Augustine's idea of the pantheist God. He was very influential in reviving Aristotle's teaching in the Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, it became a law in the Catholic Church that you must teach Aristotle's doctrine as far as the origin of the universe, or you would be treated as a heretic. In the early 1600s, Galileo invented the telescope. He looked at the moon and noticed the rugged surface of the moon. He then said the moon was not smooth like Aristotle said it was. Aristotle had said back in 400 BC that the moon was like a perfect smooth sphere, a crystal ball to reflect the sunlight. Galileo even published a book that stated the moon was not smooth. Aristotle was also contradicted by Galileo on his theory of gravity. Aristotle had said that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. Galileo proved that to be wrong. In the mid-1600s, Galileo, under penalty of death by the Catholic Church, had to recant his awful heresy of teaching that the moon was not smooth. He had dared to suggest that the doctrines of Aristotle as taught by the Church could be wrong. He wrote a second book to say that he was wrong, and the moon was perfectly smooth. The priests even refused to look through Galileo's telescope because they said it was demon-possessed. The hold of Aristotle's philosophy on the minds of the people of that time was so strong that scientific progress was hindered. We face the same thing today. The faulty teaching of evolution is hindering scientific progress. Thomas Aquinas was no doubt a very sincere man. However, he was sincerely wrong. He was a very influential person in the Renaissance, which is called the Great Awakening. He is often called the father of the Renaissance. This was a time for getting people to think again. They had began to be skeptical of religion in general, and the Catholic Church in particular. The next influential character we come to in our tracing of the history of evolution is Benoit de Millet. He was born in 1656 and died about 1738. He was very anti-Bible and tried to influence anyone he could not to believe in the Bible. He was very full of occult ideas. He wrote a book which was his name spelled backwards, Taliemed. He was a very avid atheist, evolutionist, and a materialist. He believed in a great infinite age of the earth. He was very influential in furthering the ideas of evolution, particularly in the country of France. Another man of this time was Maupertuis, born 1698 and died in 1759. He was a physicist and mathematician and was a close friend of Voltaire. Both of these men hated Christianity with a passion and wanted to do anything they could to discredit the Bible. Voltaire, born 1694 and died 1798, was a deist and was an open enemy of Christianity. When he was 5 years of age, he memorized the Skeptic's poem, and on his deathbed he said, "I am abandoned by God and man. I shall go to hell." He is also quoted as saying, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary for man to invent him." Many people in colleges today use this quote to pull people away from Christianity. Voltaire is also quoted as saying, "I wish I had never been born." This he is also has said to have scoffed at Sir Isaac Newton. Newton had been meditating on Daniel 12:4, which says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Newton said that he believed someday man would go more than 50 miles per hour. Voltaire picked up on this and laughed. He then traveled around preaching about the ridiculous ideas in the Bible to put such thoughts into Newton's head. Voltaire had a deist friend as a young man named Abbé de Chateauneuf, a bachelor and probably a homosexual. During the French Revolution, Voltaire tried to establish a 10-day work week instead of a 7-day week, just to try to get people away from the 7 days of creation. This, of course, was a miserable failure. This is just an example of what he tried to do to get people away from the Bible and Christianity. Another Frenchman during this time of turmoil in the 1600s and 1700s was a man named Comte de Buffon. He was the director of the French Botanical Gardens for 50 years. He was also a prolific author. He wrote a 44-volume series on science called History of Nature. This is full of evolutionary ideas. His writing before the French Revolution was very careful not to do things that would offend the Catholic Church. He was very influential in spreading the doctrine of evolution around the world. Another man that is very important as we trace the history of evolution is Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin. He was born in 1731 and died in 1802. He was an extremely fat person. In fact, he was so fat they had to cut a curve in the dining room table so that he could get up to the table. He was a medical doctor. He was also very immoral. He had 12 legitimate children and 2 illegitimate children. He was known to have many affairs. He was a great admirer of the French philosopher Rousseau, who was the chief philosopher of the French Revolution. Darwin was a deist, not an atheist, but was a strong opponent of Christianity. In 1794, he wrote a book called Zoonomia, which contained many of the evolutionary ideas that were later claimed by Charles, his grandson. The United States and England were not yet ready to accept the evolutionary ideas because there was still such a strong Christian influence. About 65 years later, his grandson Charles would get credit for modern ideas of evolution. Erasmus Darwin founded the Lunar Society in Birmingham, England in the late 1700s. I think it is not a coincidence that people who are atheists or evolutionists frequently have a wicked lifestyle, or at least a lifestyle against the plain teachings of the Bible. Therefore, evolution is an easy way for them to justify their lifestyle. The problem is one way of philosophy, not of evidence. They don't want there to be a God because of their wicked lifestyle. That is their real problem. We will continue with influential men in the history of evolution as we continue with the history of evolution.